Alan had always dreamed of a quiet life. For many years, he lived in loud cities, busy streets, and crowded apartments. So when he finally found a small wooden cabin deep inside the forest, he felt his heart relax for the first time in years. The cabin stood alone, surrounded by tall trees, cold fresh air, and the soft sound of wind passing through the leaves. To Alan, it felt like heaven. He arrived early in the morning, a small truck full of his boxers behind him. Birds were singing, sunlight was gentle, and everything felt peaceful. He stepped out, stretched his arms, and smiled. "This is where my real life begins," he whispered to himself. He didn't know that peace would only last a few minutes. Alan unlocked the cabin door, stepped inside. The place was old but beautiful, wooden floors, stone fireplace, and a big window showing the forest outside. He placed his bags down and started unpacking. He made coffee, opened the windows, and breathed in the fresh forest smell. But just as he lifted his cup to take his first sip, he heard heavy footsteps outside. At first he ignored it. Maybe hikers? Maybe neighbors? But the footsteps got louder fast, angry, almost like marching. Then came the sound of voices. Not friendly voices. Sharp, annoyed, and bossy. Before Alan could even reach the door, 3 people stormed onto his land. They didn't knock. They didn't greet him. They simply walked straight toward his cabin like they owned it. Alan stepped outside, confused. The first person was a woman with a tight jacket, sunglasses, and a thick folder in her hand. She looked at him as if he was a stranger trespassing on her property. Behind her stood 2 men, crossing their arms, staring at Alan with unfriendly eyes. "Who are you?" the woman demanded. Alan blinked. "I'm Alan. I just moved in today." The woman shook her head aggressively. "No. This land belongs to the HOA. You cannot live here. You need to leave." Alan felt a strange chill run down his spine. This was not a friendly welcome. "I think there's some confusion," he said calmly. "I bought this cabin legally. Here are my papers." He pulled out his purchase documents from his bag and offered them to her, but she didn't look at them. Instead, she laughed, a cold, mocking laugh. "We don't need to see your papers," she said. "Our rules are final. Our land, our authority." One of the men stepped forward. "You're trespassing," he said in a deep voice. "This cabin falls under our community rules, and we never approved your move-in." Alan felt his heart beat faster. Something was definitely wrong. Why were they acting like this? Why didn't they care about the legal papers? He tried explaining again, but they kept interrupting him. The woman suddenly pulled out her phone and made a call. "We have a situation," she said loudly. "Someone is trying to take our land." Yes, he's still here. We need to remove him immediately." Alan stared at her, shocked. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't breaking in. He was the new owner. So why were they treating him like this? The men began walking around his cabin, checking his windows, pointing at his truck, scribbling notes. One of them said, "We will fine him for every violation. He won't last a week." Fine him. Violation? What were they talking about? But Alan remained calm. He watched them. He listened. He didn't argue too much, because deep inside he knew something they did not. They thought he was weak. They thought he was just another victim they could scare. They thought they had power over him, but the truth was far bigger and far more shocking. Alan didn't just own the cabin. He owned the entire land the HOA lived on, but he didn't reveal it. Not yet. He simply looked at them with a quiet, steady gaze. Let them play their game, he thought, because soon they would learn exactly who they were dealing with. The next morning, Alan woke up early. The forest was quiet again, almost pretending nothing unusual had happened yesterday. Sunlight touched the cabin windows and the air smelled fresh like pine trees. For a moment, Alan felt peaceful, but the peace did not last long. When he stepped outside to grab firewood, he froze. A bright red paper was stuck to his front door. HOA warning, notice violation number 1, Alan sighed. Violation? For what? He hadn't even finished unpacking. He removed the paper and read it slowly. The letter claimed he was breaking community rules because His truck was parked incorrectly, his cabin paint was not approved, and he failed to check in with HOA management. Alan shook his head. His cabin was not part of any HOA community. He had confirmed it before buying the place. Still, here they were, acting like they controlled everything. He placed the warning inside and made coffee. As he drank it, he noticed another strange thing. A man stood between the trees. Staring at the cabin, he wasn't hiding well. He kept peeking from behind a large pine tree, pretending he was just walking. But his eyes stayed fixed on Alan's home. Alan stepped outside and waved politely. The man quickly turned around and pretended to look at a bush. Then he slowly walked away without looking back. Alan raised an eyebrow. So now they're spying on me, he thought. He knew bullies. He knew their style. First threats, then warnings, then pressure. They always acted big until someone stood up to them. Alan went back inside, but the feeling stayed. Something was off. Something bigger was happening here. Later that day, Alan started exploring the area around his cabin. He wanted to understand why the HOA was so confident. As he walked deeper into the woods, he discovered a wide gravel road leading to a residential neighborhood. Small houses stood in neat rows. Plastic fences separated the yards. And every house had a sign near the mailbox saying, HOA community, follow the rules. Then he saw something that explained everything. At the entrance of the neighborhood, a large green sign read, Property of Pine Ridge HOA, land leased from original owner. Alan stared at that sign for a long moment. A slow smile spread across his face, so the HOA did not actually own the land. They were leasing it, and who was the new landowner? Him. No wonder they were panicking. If he had the legal right, he could change their rules. Or even remove the HOA completely. But why didn't they know? Hadn't they read the updated land record? Or were they simply too confident, too arrogant, to check? Alan walked back to his cabin with new curiosity burning inside him. The second visit by late afternoon, he heard footsteps again. This time, 5 people walked toward the cabin, the same angry woman from yesterday, the 2 men, and 2 new faces. They didn't look friendly. They looked ready for a fight. The woman pointed at him. You ignored our warning. That's another violation. Alan leaned against his portrail. I didn't ignore anything, but your notice doesn't apply to me. The group exchanged irritated looks. One of the new members stepped forward. He was shorter, but his expression was sharp. This land is under our control, he said. You must follow our rules. If you break them, we have the right to fine you or remove you. Alan almost laughed. Remove him? From his own property? But he kept a calm face. I understand your rules, he said, but you can't enforce them on land you do not own. The woman slammed her folder shut. That's enough. We expect you at the community hall tomorrow morning. Mandatory meeting? If you refuse, consequences will follow. Without waiting for an answer, the entire group turned around and marched away as they left. Alan looked up at the sky. They were confident. Too confident. And the more he watched them threaten him, the more he wanted to know how deep this problem went. He opened his laptop that night and began digging. Old documents, expired leases, past complaints from homeowners, secret HOA rules. In a long history of bullying residents, every detail pushed Alan closer to the truth. This wasn't a small problem. This HOA had been abusing people for years, and now, by a strange twist of fate, they were standing on land they didn't know he owned. Alan closed the laptop and took a deep breath. The real game was just beginning. Alan barely slept that night. His mind kept returning to the same thought. Why was the HOA acting so blindly? They spoke with such confidence, as if the land belonged to them. As if he was just a stranger living on property they controlled. Yet the documents online clearly said otherwise. Around midnight, Alan sat at the small wooden table inside the cabin. A single lamp lit the room. He opened his laptop and spread out all the papers he had collected earlier from the courthouse website. Land boundaries, ownership history, lease renewal dates. Everything was right there, and none of it matched what the HOA claimed. Most shocking of all was the lease document. Years ago, the entire neighborhood had been built on land leased from the original owner. The owner passed away a long time ago, and the land was later sold quietly at an auction. Alan had bought it accidentally. He didn't even know the land included a residential neighborhood. He thought he had bought only the forest area and the cabin. But as he read deeper, he found a small note at the bottom of the deed. Land boundaries include the attached HOA community, pending lease expiration. Alan leaned back in his chair, so this wasn't just a cabin purchase. It was an entire land purchase. He rubbed his forehead slowly, taking it all in. The HOA had never updated their records. They still believed they were leasing land from the old owner's family. Meanwhile, that family had sold the land long before Alan arrived. The HOA simply forgot, or maybe they never checked. Alan opened another file, homeowner complaints. One resident wrote, "HOA fines us for everything. We can't even plant flowers without their approval." Another wrote, "They enter our yards without permission. They threaten us with eviction if we question them." Alan shook his head. The HOA wasn't just strict, they were bullies. Now things made sense. They didn't want him because they couldn't control him. They thought he was a threat. But they didn't know the biggest threat was the mistake they themselves had made years ago. The next morning, the sun was barely up when Alan walked to his truck. He planned to visit the county office to get physical copies of all the land documents. He wanted every detail ready before meeting the HOA tomorrow. But the moment he opened his truck door, he stopped. Another paper was stuck to his window. HOA violation number 2. Unauthorized vehicle. Alan stared at the paper and laughed softly. They were desperate now. They probably stayed awake thinking of new ways to pressure him. He removed the paper, threw it onto the seat, and drove off. County office discoveries, the county clerk. An older man with glasses looked up when Alan explained his situation. "You bought the Pine Ridge land?" the clerk asked, surprised. "That's rare. Most people don't even know that land includes the HOA neighborhood." Alan nodded. "I discovered that last night." The clerk pulled up old maps. "These documents are nearly 15 years old," he said, pointing at faded papers. "This HOA never renewed their lease. They assumed ownership because nobody corrected them. So legally," Alan began. The clerk finished his sentence. "You own everything. The forest, the cabin, and every square foot under that HOA." Alan let out a slow breath. This changed everything, not just for him, but for everyone living under that HOA's control. He collected copies of all legal papers and headed back to his cabin. Returning home as soon as he stepped onto his porch, he noticed new footprints in the dirt. Fresh ones. Someone had been there while he was gone. He unlocked the door and walked inside. His sofa cushions were moved. His kitchen drawers were slightly open. They had entered his cabin. He clenched his jaw. The HOA had crossed a line now. On his table, he found a new letter, final warning, attend meeting or face serious penalties. Alan read the note slowly, then he placed it gently on the table. They wanted to fight. They wanted to intimidate him. They wanted him to bend, but they didn't know the truth. They didn't know that the land beneath their homes, the land they believed they controlled, already belonged to the man they were threatening. Alan gathered his documents and closed his laptop. Tomorrow, at the HOA meeting, he would not go as a scared homeowner. He would go as the silent landlord. Ready to turn the whole game upside down? The day of the HOA meeting arrived, but Alan was in no rush to go. The meeting was in the afternoon, and he spent the morning checking the documents again, preparing every detail carefully. He was calm, but alert. He knew the HOA wouldn't sit quietly today. By noon, dark clouds began forming above the forest. The air felt heavy, like something big was about to happen. Alan stepped outside to load his documents into his car, and stopped immediately. 3 unfamiliar cars were parked near his cabin, and 6 HOA members stood around them like guards. They were not the same people as before. These were new faces, more serious, more aggressive. Some held clipboards, others held cameras, as if preparing to record something. Alan walked toward them slowly. "Can I help you?" he asked. A tall man with silver hair stepped forward. "You can start by opening your cabin," he said coldly. "We're here to inspect it." Alan raised an eyebrow. "Inspect my home? On what authority?" The man didn't blink. "HOA Regulation 3-B. We may enter any property in our community to ensure rule compliance." Alan almost laughed at the absurdity. "This is not your community, and you cannot enter my home." The group of men exchanged irritated looks. One woman stepped out from the side with a camera still recording. "If you refuse," she said sharply, "we will report you for non-cooperation and begin removal procedures." Alan's calm expression didn't change. "You're threatening to remove me from land you don't own?" The silver-haired man scoffed. "That's enough. We're doing this the hard way." Two HOA men began walking toward his front door as if they were about to break in. Alan moved quickly, stepping in front of them, blocking the entrance. "This is my private property," he said firmly. "You step inside without permission, and it becomes breaking and entering." The group paused. They hadn't expected resistance, but they weren't ready to give up. The woman with the camera walked closer to Alan and began speaking loudly so it recorded clearly. "This resident is refusing lawful entry," she said. "This will be added to his violations." Alan stared directly into the camera. "This is illegal. Harassment," he said calmly. "You are forcing rules on land that no longer belongs to your HOA." The silver-haired man's eyes narrowed. "What? Do you mean no longer belongs?" he asked. Alan didn't answer. Instead, he held up a folder. "You will find out today at the meeting." His silence made the group even more suspicious. They backed off for now, but stayed close, whispering among themselves. Alan could hear pieces of their conversation. Is he bluffing? What did he mean by that? Should we call the president? No, let's handle him at the meeting. Alan got into his truck and drove away, leaving them confused and frustrated. The meeting begins. The community hall was already crowded by the time Alan arrived. Chairs were filled with residents, many looking tired, stressed, and worried. On the stage stood the HOA board, the angry woman from before, the two men, and the silver-haired leader. Alan noticed how residents stayed quiet, almost afraid to speak. The HOA had clearly ruled this place with fear for a long time. When Alan walked in, spread through the room, "That's the new guy. The HOA hates him already. What did he do?" "No. What did they do?" Alan sat in the front row, placing his thick folder on his lap. The meeting started with the HOA president speaking in a loud, fake official voice. "We are here to discuss a serious issue," she announced. "A new resident has violated multiple HOA rules, refused inspections, ignored warnings, and threatened the order of our community." The board members nodded dramatically. Then she turned toward Alan. "Stand up," she ordered. Alan slowly stood. His face remained calm, almost relaxed. The president continued, "You moved here without permission. You are living on HOA land, and you must either follow our rules or leave." The room was silent. Residents watched nervously. Alan waited for the perfect moment. Then, slowly, he opened the folder. "I'm glad we're discussing land ownership today," he said loudly, "because it seems all of you forgot to read an extremely important document." He held up the official land deed. The HOA president froze. The audience leaned forward. Alan's voice was steady, powerful. "This land does not belong to your HOA," he said. "The lease expired years ago. The original owner sold it, and the person who bought the entire land, including your community, was me." Gasps filled the room. The HOA board members went pale. The president stumbled back, speechless. Residents began whispering excitedly. Alan looked directly at the board. "You tried to control me," he said, quietly, "but you should have checked who owned the ground." Under your feet, the hall fell into deep, stunned silence. And this silence was only the beginning of what was coming next. For a long moment, the community hall felt frozen. No one moved. No one even breathed. The HOA board sat stiff like statues, their faces drained of color. The residents stared at Alan with wide eyes, whispering loudly now, instead of quietly. Alan placed the land deed gently on the table in front of him. The sound of the folder closing echoed through the hall like a final verdict. The HOA president finally found her voice. This is impossible, she stammered. Our HOA has existed for 20 years. We have full rights to this land. Alan kept his calm expression. You had rights, he said softly. But your lease expired, and the original owners sold the land. Everything your HOA sits on is now part of my purchase. The silver-haired man jumped up from his seat. This must be fake. We would have known if ownership changed. Alan turned toward him. Did you renew the lease when it ended? The man stopped. His mouth opened, then closed again. Alan continued. Did you check public land records in the last 10 years? Silence. Did you confirm that your HOA still had legal authority over this land? Or silence? The truth was now visible to everyone. The HOA never checked a single thing, they assumed. They acted powerful. They bullied people because no one fought back. But now the residents were seeing what they actually were: unprepared and careless. Residents began to speak. A woman from the audience stood up. Is this true? She asked the board. Did you really not check our land rights? The board members didn't answer. Another resident, an older man with shaking hands, stood up next. You fined me last year for having a garden, he said. And you threatened to take my home when I couldn't pay. Was that even legal? The angry woman from the board swallowed hard. We were following standard procedure, but the residents interrupted her. You entered my yard without permission. You made my family pay for repainting our door. You forced us to follow rules none of us agreed to. Voices grew louder. The audience was no longer afraid. The HOA president raised her hands, trying to calm everyone, but nobody listened. For years they had been silent, and the truth had opened the gates. Alan watched everything quietly. He wasn't here to humiliate anyone. He simply wanted justice and peace. The breakdown of the board. The president finally snapped and slammed a stack of papers onto the table. Enough. We are the HOA. We have authority. This newcomer is lying. Alan lifted the deed again. You can verify every detail, he said. You can go to the county office right now. Call them. Check online records. Everything I said is public information. A young man from the back shouted, If he's lying, prove it. The board members looked at each other nervously. The silver-haired leader grabbed the papers from Alan's hand, scanned them quickly, then frowned deeper and deeper. These signatures, he whispered. This stamp, this date. The paper began shaking in his hands. The president leaned over to look. Her face twisted. No, this can't be true. But it was. Finally, she sank into her chair, covering her face with her hands. The board was collapsing in front of everyone. Alan's final words. Alan stepped forward, so everyone could hear him clearly. I did not come here to fight, he said. I moved here for peace. But your HOA came to my cabin with threats, warnings, and fear. Heads turned toward the board, shame filling their eyes. But I'm not here to punish anyone, Alan continued. I want this community to be free from fear, not controlled by people who never checked their own rights. The residents nodded. Some even clapped softly. Alan then looked directly at the board. You no longer have authority over me. In fact, you no longer have authority over anyone. Your lease ended. Your power ended with it. The board remained silent, defeated. You may keep your positions, Alan said calmly, but from today, things will change. Every rule will be reviewed. Every fine that was unfair will be canceled, and every resident will get their freedom back. A wave of relief swept through the room. People clapped louder now, grateful, hopeful. But Alan wasn't finished. He took one step closer to the board and said in a quiet, firm voice, You tried to scare the wrong person. I am not the one who should have been afraid. The president didn't look up. She knew it was over, and tomorrow. The consequences would truly begin. The day after the explosive meeting, the community woke up with a different kind of air, quiet, heavy, yet strangely hopeful. For the first time in years, people stepped out of their homes without fear of being watched or judged. They looked around as if the neighborhood felt bigger, freer, lighter. Alan didn't leave his cabin that morning. He sat on his porch with a warm cup of coffee and watched the sun rise slowly through the trees. He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't angry. He was simply calm. A calmness he hadn't felt since the HOA first stormed onto his land. He knew the board wouldn't stay silent for long, and he was right. Around 10 o'clock, a white SUV slowly pulled up near his cabin. The doors opened and out came the HOA president, the silver-haired man, and 2 other board members. But this time, they looked nothing like the confident bullies from before. Their shoulders were low, their expressions tired. The arrogance they once carried had completely faded. The president walked forward, holding a thin envelope in her hands. We need to talk, she said quietly. Alan nodded and waited. She took a deep breath. We checked the records. Everything you've said is true.
Ow.
The land belongs to you. The lease expired long ago, and we never renewed it. Her voice cracked on the last few words. The silver-haired man stepped forward next. We acted wrongly. We didn't just make mistakes. We abused our power. We looked at the ground. We want to apologize. Alan didn't smile. He didn't gloat. Simply said, I hope you mean it for the residents, not just for me. The president nodded quickly. We do. We know we hurt people. Many people. She held out the envelope. These are our resignation letters. All 4 of us. We're stepping down from the HOA board. Alan took the envelope and placed it on the porch railing without opening it. You don't have to resign, he said. But you must change. The community deserves better. The board members exchanged surprised looks. Alan continued. If you want to stay, you stay under new rules, fair rules. No more threats. No more bullying. No more hiding information. Every decision must be voted on by the residents. They nodded silently, and one more thing, Alan added.
Alan.
All unfair fines must be cancelled. All warnings removed. Anyone who was threatened or mistreated must receive a formal apology. The board agreed instantly, desperate to fix what they had broken. A new beginning for the community. Later that afternoon, a large meeting was held again, but this time, it wasn't run by fear. It was filled with laughter, relief, and excitement. Residents talked loudly, children played outside, and neighbors who had avoided each other for years finally came together. Alan arrived with a small stack of papers containing the new rules. They were simple. Residents choose the board. No rule can be made without a community vote. No home can be inspected without permission. No fines unless proved fair and reasonable. Everyone must be treated with respect. When Alan finished reading, the whole hall clapped. The HOA president, now humble, stood beside him and said, "Want to thank Alan. Without him, we would still be hurting this community." Alan shook his head. This community saved itself. I only showed the truth. Quiet after the storm over the next few weeks, everything changed. Residents planted gardens freely. Children rode bikes without being told to slow down. People painted their doors any color they liked. The board apologized to every homeowner personally, and the fear that once filled the neighborhood slowly disappeared. As for the HOA bullies who refused to change, they quietly moved away. No drama, no arguments. They left because they could no longer control anyone. Alan's final piece, Alan returned to his simple life in the cabin. He spent his days enjoying the forest, reading books, fixing small things in the cabin, and meeting the grateful neighbors who stopped by with cookies, gifts, or just warm thank you smiles. One evening, as he sat on the porch watching the sunset, he thought about everything that had happened. The threats, the warnings, the pressure, the lies, all from people who didn't know the truth. A soft wind moved through the trees. Birds circled above the clearing. Alan closed his eyes and breathed deeply. He had moved here for peace, and after a storm that shook an entire community, he finally had it, because sometimes life works in strange ways. The people who tried to take his home didn't know he was the one who owned theirs, and that truth changed everything.